you expressed your freedom with women a lot, which helped you learn what you want. You had to go through that education first to really have what you want, so that you're not trapped in a relationship that doesn't satisfy you and benefit you, so that instead you can proactively find the relationship that is best for you and that fulfills you the most. My problem was living in Sacramento, having so many of my friends get married so young to women that were controlling them before they ever had an opportunity to figure out what they really wanted. And it's the same. And those situations, I think of women like the government, like an entity that is trying to take your freedom for their benefit, and then trying to constantly manipulate you into you thinking that it's good for you. And the only way to know the alternative is to experience the alternatives. So in the perfect world, every man would go out and experience many women, and then figure out exactly what they want, and then get it, and then put all their energy into maintaining it without regret, without resentment. See, because the guys that get married before they understand the alternatives, once they start seeing the alternatives, like maybe they see what I do, and then they're like, oh wow, I could have had that. Then they start living with regret and resentment, and that is going to take away from the relationship. So they either have two choices. If they get married too early, they can either hide in a bubble and isolate themselves from what the alternatives are and never know, which is basically living inside the matrix, or they can live in resentment and regret that they made a commitment that is now bringing them more drawbacks than benefits going forward, and precluding them from finding a relationship that does truly fulfill them. So I'm at the point right now where actually I've been with way too many women here. I'm forcing myself to be with more women because I feel like I'm at an expensive buffet, and I'm not really getting my value out of it unless I eat all the food. So I'm forcing myself to be with girls I don't even want to be with sometimes. And I'm really craving that one girl who can really fulfill me. But it's just really hard to find, because the more complicated a person you are, the more and the older you get too, the more picky you get about things. It's hard to find someone to fit all of the needs.
We could talk. I mean, I think that we have a lot more conversations that we could have, Tony. If you want to do another podcast in the future, I'd totally be down. I mean, we're almost an hour and a half in. I'm down to keep talking, but I just don't want it to go on for like 3 hours. And I think we can keep talking easily for 3 hours. But I think, have you, because there's another thread that I kind of wanted to go down, and maybe this could be one of the final ones on this podcast, but have you ever done any research into sex addiction? I'm not trying to like label you or anything like that. I'm just saying this is something that I felt that I went through after I got back from Thailand for a long time. And especially in the beginning of my relationship, there was a lot of porn addiction. There was a lot of thinking about how I want novelty, how I want variety, and I'm not getting it in my relationship or whatever. But ultimately, that's not what a relationship is. I was perfectly happy in my relationship. That was just my personal problem. So I read a lot of books, and there's actually a lot of data, a lot of real knowledge about sex addiction, and like a long kind of pedigree of scientists studying this stuff. And there's a lot of really interesting things. Like they talk about like avatars, rituals, like a ritual that you'll go down, like, kind of like the cruising thing where you'll get on your motor, like you're at home, you're scrolling Instagram, you see some hot chick, and they always say that there's like a type, or if you're really deep into it, a few different types. So like I like a girl, with big tits or something, for example. And that's like my type. I like big tits. I like, long black hair. I like the makeup this certain way, like when they're wearing this sort of clothes. And then you see that, and you see that on Instagram, and it triggers you. You're scrolling. Maybe you DM a few people. Then you're like, before you know it, you're lacing up. You're going to your motorbike. You're cruising around. You're looking for that girl who's like the thing on the thing. And like, I've experienced that. And I know a lot of guys who experience that. And like, when I read some of these sex addiction books, I was like, wow, these guys have it figured out. Like they got it down to a T, like the pattern. And it's like, you know, humans, we have these patterns in our head. Like same thing when we do our bodybuilding. It's like, I got to do my squats before I do my leg presses before. If I do it the other way, it's weird. This is how I do it. You know what I mean? You have your rituals, your habits. And when you're so used to having casual sex and all this kind of stuff, it becomes like a ritual and a habit in of itself. It becomes an addiction. I'm not trying to say that in a disempowering way, or like it's a drug addiction or like it's bad or whatever, but it's just something that I noticed in myself. And I'm curious if you've ever, because I know you're a well-read guy. Have you ever read any studies on that or looked into that at all?
The reason I haven't read studies on it is because I feel like I understand my own psychology when it comes to this good enough as far as the sex addiction. And I could talk for days about it. So let me think about how to address it really quickly. No, I don't have a sex addiction. I know that because I can compare myself to people I do know that have sex addictions. And what I am is completely different. I have an addiction to affection. So for me, it's much more pleasurable to have a girl just touching and caressing me than anything to do with the sex part of it. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, I guess using the word addiction maybe that always means a bad thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing, my high need for affection, because I also give a lot of affection. And that's one of the reasons why women want to be with me. So it's a survival thing to maintain good relationships. And it's just hard to find women that give me enough affection. So I get it from multiple women. But that's the same thing as if you needed a certain amount of food and they didn't have all the food you wanted one place, you go to the next place and get the other food. I don't think it's a problem to need to get the enough affection from multiple women because one is not able to give it to me. Now, I know what it also feels like to have a sex addiction because I use a lot of supplements and I experiment with sex protocols. And recently, a couple times I hit everything right with my chemistry to where I had, let's say, a couple 24-hour periods where I definitely had a sex addiction because I'm thinking about sex and it's distracting me from the other. If we're looking again at like this, at like an anabolic matrix style, and we have these different pathways towards happiness and we need to fill them all up. If my focus is so much on the sex pathway that I'm ignoring these other pathways of quality of life, health, longevity, and happiness, then that's where it becomes an addiction. When I'm not able to fill up that category, or that filling up that category takes so much work that it's taking away from other parts of my life. So I did have that for a couple days. Wow. I mean, I'm glad I felt it, but I'm actually glad. Like, we all want more sex drive, performance, and libido, but there's definitely a threshold where it becomes too much, to where your drive is too high, to where you can't think about anything else. And I have, like I said, friends that are sex addicts, so I know that this is like they're thinking about sex too much. So that's definitely not me. I just for me, it's partially an expression of freedom. It's partially continuous learning experience to figure out what I like and want, and it's a need for affection from women beyond just the normal sex. And when I sleep with a lot of these girls that are professionals, but not like high-end professionals. The high-end professionals, amazing experience because they know everything. That they treat you like a Rubik's Cube. You don't even know what they're doing, and they've done all this. You feel amazing. But the lower-end ones, they have this ritual, like, you know, they touch you a certain way. It's very robotic. And for the sex addicts, that's enough for them, right? They want that 3 times a day. They have to have it 3 times a day in order to feel like satisfied. Otherwise they feel like something's missing. And that's kind of an addiction to me. For me, it's more about the addiction is definitely the affection and the connection. So here I am looking for love in the lower
in all the wrong places in Pattaya, Thailand.
And that's what's driving me crazy, you know. And even well, we'll talk more about Thai girls than that another time. I can talk a lot about that.